Hi everybody, welcome to a brand new lecture of the Ankit Faria Certified Ethical Hacker Program. This lecture, like the previous lecture, is going to be focused on network reconnaissance and information gathering. In the previous lecture, I gave you a brief on the basic network reconnaissance and information gathering techniques like ping sweeping, traceroute, DNS tools, and so on. We had also seen how you can use ping and traceroute to identify the operating system or to guess the operating system running on a remote computer. So we will actually continue where we ended the previous lecture, and we're going to actually discuss a very interesting and very important topic or method related to information gathering and network reconnaissance. And the name of the topic is port scanning. So what exactly is port scanning? In fact, if we take a step behind, what exactly are ports? So only if you understand what ports are can you actually understand what port scanning is all about. So let me actually switch to the PowerPoint slides and then start explaining to you what exactly are ports. And then we'll get into what is port scanning, and then I'll also like to give you a live demonstration of various port scanning techniques that are popularly used by cyber criminals. Now, just as a quick reminder, we are basically discussing step number 2 in a hacker's journey while he or she is trying to hack into a computer, and step 2 is information gathering and network reconnaissance. So within that, we're going to discuss port scanning. Now, to be able to understand what port scanning is all about, I think it's very important to first of all even understand what exactly are ports. Now, typically there are two types of ports. One are hardware ports, and the second is virtual ports. I think hardware ports is a concept that all of us are quite familiar with. Your computer, be it your desktop or your laptop, or maybe even your mobile phone or even your tablet, all of them have a port, which is a hardware port. A hardware port is essentially something like your USB port, your parallel port, your charging port, your Wi-Fi port, or your Bluetooth port. So essentially these are doors on your machine using which data can be exchanged between two devices. So imagine that you have a USB port on your laptop or on your desktop, and you take a USB cable to connect a mobile phone to your laptop or desktop. So that USB cable has to be connected to the USB port on your computer. So that port becomes the door through which data can be exchanged between your desktop or laptop and your mobile phone. So you can transfer maybe your pictures from your mobile phone to your computer, or maybe there's some files that you want to, or music that you want to transfer from your computer to your mobile phone. So ports are actually nothing but doors through which data can be exchanged between two devices. And typically hardware ports is something that all of us are very familiar with and all of us are very comfortable with. But in computer hacking, we are not really interested in hardware ports. What we are actually interested in are the virtual ports that exist on a machine. So what exactly are virtual ports and what makes them so interesting? See, virtual ports are just like hardware ports except that they are virtual, or you can't see them. Hardware ports you can see. If you look on the right or left or behind your laptop, you'll be able to see the hardware ports. But virtual ports you can't see. But they exist on any and every machine that is connected to the internet. For example, if you open your browser on your computer just to connect to say google.com, so what happens is your browser will open a virtual door or a virtual port on your machine, using which it will communicate with the internet or with the Google server. So for any kind of communication to happen on the internet or over a network between two devices or between two computers, there has to be a port open on both those computers. So you have two types of ports. Within virtual ports also, you have two types of ports. You have a local port and a remote port. So local port is basically a port that is open on your local machine, while a remote port is a virtual port that is open on a remote machine. So only if a port is open on both the machines that are involved, which could be your machine and Google, which could be your machine and Facebook, only then communication can successfully take place between the two computers. So I'll formally read the definition of virtual ports. Virtual ports are basically virtual doors through which web applications are able to communicate with other devices on the internet. Virtual ports are open on your computer by applications like your browser, your chatting software, and so on. And they are also open on the remote computers like Google, Facebook, YouTube, and so on. So the obvious question here is, see, hardware ports you can just physically see on your computer or your mobile phone or your TV as well. But how do you see the virtual ports that are open on your machine? So I like to quickly give a demonstration to all of you. So the question is how to view open ports on your own machine, which is the local machine. So there are 2-3 ways of doing this. First is using the netstat-n command. If you remember, we had discussed the netstat-n command in one of the earlier lectures. So I open up MS-DOS and I'm going to type netstat-n, and if you notice, this is the output that I'm going to get. Right? So let me actually copy this output to a notepad file so all of you can actually view it clearly, because right now it may not be that clear in the MS-DOS prompt. So I copy it and I paste it into this notepad file. So if all of you look at the screen, then essentially this is what the output looks like. I'm just going to change the font size so it's easier for everybody to view what is being displayed. So if all of you look at the screen, this is pretty much the output that you're going to get when you type netstat-n in the MS-DOS prompt. So there are 4 columns here. First column is the protocol. So all the connections that are there on your machine right now are all TCP based connections. The second column is the local address column. Now each entry in this column represents a separate connection or a unique connection that has been established on your machine. So for example, this is a particular connection, this is another connection, and so on. Now in each row under the local address column, in each row there is an IP address followed by a colon followed by a port number. So this list of port numbers that have been mentioned in this column is actually telling you all the different ports that are open on your local machine. So say for example, if you look at the first entry in this output, it tells us that the port 1031 is open on my computer. Similarly, the second entry is telling me that port 1032 is open, then port 1033 is open, and so on. So if you want to find out the list of open ports on your machine, just type netstat-n and look under the local address column. Similarly, on the right of that column, you have the foreign address column. So this actually gives you the list of IP addresses and port numbers on a remote machine with whom you have a connection established. And once again, in each row you have an IP address followed by the respective port number to which you are connected. So if you want to find out the port numbers on a remote machine to which with whom you have a direct connection, then just type netstat-n in MS-DOS. Now netstat-n is not the best way to view all the open ports on your machine. There's actually an even better technique which I like to share with all of you at this stage. We have discussed this before as well. It is basically a software called TCP View. TCP View. So let me quickly open up TCP View on my computer and give to all of you a live demonstration. So if all of you look at the screen, this is the output of TCP view. So what is unique about TCP view that netstat-n is unable to do is that netstat-n does not tell you which applications on your computer or which software installed on your computer have open ports on your machine or have established connections with remote machines. But TCP view tells you or gives you that information. For example, if you look at the first column of TCP view, it lists all the applications that are open on your machine that have established network connections. So let's look at this particular entry. It's basically Google Chrome has established a connection. In that row, if you look at the local port column, it tells me that Google Chrome has opened port 1196 on my machine, and then next to it is the remote address column. So it tells me that okay, it's open 1196 port on my machine, and then it is connected to this particular IP address, and on its right you have the remote port column. So it tells me the port number on the remote machine to which it has established a connection with. So TCP view is fabulous because not only does it tell you what are the open ports on your machine, if you want to close a particular port, if you suspect that some malicious application that you don't trust has opened a port on your system, you can right click on that application and simply select the end process option. So I'm going to select, say, this iTunes application. I don't want it to open a port on my machine. So I right click on it, click on end process, and click on yes. And within a few seconds, if you notice, that iTunes port has now been closed on my machine. As simple as that. So TCP view gives you a lot of control over what applications are communicating or establishing a network connection on your machine, and what ports they are opening on your machine. So I highly recommend that if you want to find out a list of open ports on your machine, use TCP view instead of netstat-n. Now, a lot of times, a lot of students get in touch with me after watching this demonstration, asking me that, is it dangerous? Is it dangerous to have open ports on your machine? So using TCP view and netstat-n, we just found that there are maybe 20 or 30 ports open on my computer. So does that mean that my computer can be hacked? Does that mean that a criminal can hack into my computer? The answer is not really. Or rather, it depends. And it depends on which application has opened the port on my machine. Which is why TCP view is so important. So once again, if I open TCP view, the first column tells me the name of the software that has opened a particular port. Right? So what I need to do is, if I recognize the name of the software, so all these ports are opened at Google Chrome. So I can check whether I've opened Google Chrome or not. So if you notice, yes, Google Chrome is open on my laptop, and I've opened up 4 different tabs in it, which means that it is pretty safe. It's not as if some malicious software is running. But if I scroll down further, maybe I'll find some software which I don't remember opening. Say for example, there's a software called System. So I don't really know whether it is a system file or whether it is a malicious virus. So I can always right click on it and click on Who Is and check whether it is basically some malicious software or some useful system software. So on system files, or it says Who Is lookups are not valid, or machine names. So these are all valid things, so you shouldn't really be worried about. Whenever there is maybe some IP address mentioned, then you can actually investigate it further. Right, so over here there's some host name, so I right click on it. It gives me more information about with whom am I connected. So that will help me decide whether it's a safe software or whether it is some kind of malicious software. So we just learned what exactly are ports, what are hardware ports, and what are virtual ports. We also learned how we can get a list of open ports on our own computer. But port scanning is a technique that allows you to find out a list of open ports on a remote computer. So finding out open ports on your own machine, I mean, you're not going to do much with it. You can just use this information to find out if there is some virus installed on your computer or not, or maybe a Trojan or some kind of spyware. But if you want to hack into somebody else's computer, you need to perform port scanning on their computer. And you need to find out what are the list of open ports on their computer. So now that you know the definition of port scanning, it is basically the art of scanning a remote target system to obtain a list of open virtual ports on it that are listening for incoming connections. This is usually one of the first few steps that every criminal must take. And the popular port scanning tools are the following. Nmap, which as all of you by now already know, is one of the best information gathering and network reconnaissance tools available on the internet. Along with that you have Strobe, Superscan, and many others. So now that you know the definition of port scanning, it's very important to understand why is it so important. Like, why is it important for you as a criminal to perform port scanning on a victim's computer? I think a very good example that comes to my mind, which I like to share with all of you, is imagine that there's a big building or a big room, and inside that room there is a lot of cash. Imagine cash is stacked up from the floor to the ceiling. There are millions of dollars or crores of rupees of cash in a building or a room. You are unfortunately standing outside that room, not inside. And you are a criminal, and you obviously want to find a way to enter that room or to enter that building. So what would you do? How do you actually go about finding a way to enter that room? How do you find out an entry point which will allow you to enter that room? So that is when you need to perform port scanning of that room or of that building. And by port scanning of that room or building, what I mean to say is, you need to walk around that building or around that room and find a list of doors or windows that may exist in that room. And each door, each window that you find is a possible or a potential entry point into that room, so that you can steal all the cash. So as you're walking around that room, you make a list of, okay, there are 5 doors open, 4 windows open. So that is port scanning. Just the way you need to find an entry point using which you can enter a room full of cash. Similarly, if there is a computer from which you want to steal something, you need to perform port scanning so that you can find out a list of open ports on it, or a list of open doors on it, or a list of entry points that will allow you to access that particular computer. So port scanning is one of the most important steps in information gathering that every criminal has to perform. Now at this point of time, I like to actually share with all of you some important port numbers. See, imagine that you are a website owner or you are a system administrator and you want to run some software on your server. Now, if you just run a software without providing a door to it or without providing a port to it, then users will not be able to connect to that software. So essentially what happens is that when you perform port scanning of a particular system, when you get a list of open ports, What do you mean by an open port? Open port essentially means that there is a particular software running on that port number. Or there is a door, when you open that door, behind that door there is a software. That's what it means. So every open port on a remote machine will have a software running on it. Just the way on my computer using TCP view, we got a list of software and the port numbers that they had opened. Similarly, when we perform port scanning on a remote computer, we will get to know the list of open ports, and behind every open port or inside every open port, there will be some software that may be running on it. And usually, depending on the type of software you're running, there are certain ports that you'll use. For example, if you look at this table that has been displayed on the screen, if I want to run, say, a website is a HTTP server or a web server, that is normally run on port 80. In other words, if I am performing port scanning of your server and I find that port 80 is open on it, then it is safe to say that I can conclude that if port 80 is open on your computer, it means that the website port is open on your machine. Or it means that you're running a web server on your machine. Similarly, if port 25 is open, it means that it's an outgoing email server, which is SMTP server, which means Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. If it's port 110, it is POP3, Post Office Protocol, which is incoming email port number. So depending on what kind of service you're running, it is normally offered on a particular port. So if I type google.com, which port number will I connect to on Google server? Port 80 normally, because that's a web server. But if it is a HTTPS connection, so instead of it's http://google.com, it is https://google.com, then I'll be connected to port 443, because that is the SSL/HTTPS port. So depending on what kind of service you're offering to your users, you will run various software on specific port numbers. So that is what I mean by popular port numbers that I mentioned in this particular table/slide. Now at this stage, I like to actually discuss some very important theory behind port scanning. So I hope you understand what exactly is port scanning. Port scanning is the process of finding out list of open ports. Why is it important? Because if you want to enter a machine, you need to find some entry points. Otherwise, how will you enter the machine? So that is what port scanning is all about, identifying possible or potential entry points into the victim's computer. So now that you know what is port scanning, why it is important, let us see how it is actually done. And before I give you a demo, I like to actually explain to you some important networking concepts related to port scanning and related to TCP/IP in general. Now on the screen, you can see what a typical TCP data packet looks like. So whenever TCP stands for Transmission Control Protocol, and I'm sure all of you have heard of the term TCP/IP. So TCP/IP, the TCP part is what I'm talking about now. This is what the TCP data packet looks like. And TCP data packet will have various fields. So you have a source port, destination port, sequence number, acknowledgement number, flags, checksum, options, padding, and then finally you have the actual data that is being transmitted. So whenever data is being transmitted